So, sniping accessories. What do you want? Now, we've talked a little bit about rifles, but let's talk about scopes. Now, I own two scopes. This one came off my PSG-1, a little slight addition of the rails so I can take it on and off. And this one I bought separately. This is a Tasco one, quite a nice scope. Don't know if you can see that. It's got illuminated reticle and all kinds of things. I don't think you'll be able to see that on camera. But like I say, very nice scope. Now the difference between these is this one is fixed. I think it's 4 or 8 times zoom. 4x40. This one. But as I say, it's got a fixed zoom. So this one you don't adjust it in and out to zoom in and out. It's got a fixed focus. It's fairly short ranged by comparison to this one, which goes up to 24 times zoom, which is significantly further than this one. But your BBs will never travel far enough for you to need that extra range. Something like this is absolutely fine. You don't need to go for a high-powered scope just because you can afford one. Now, although they look so much cooler, having a bigger scope on your rifle, you don't need it. And the other thing you'll find is you'll have more difficulty focusing on things up close. Whereas these ones, you don't have so much trouble focusing on things up close. Other things you may want: silencers for your weapons. Now, we'll talk more about silencers when we do the Special Forces video next episode. But silencers are a little bit of a, you can use them but you don't need to. On most guns they make no difference or actually decrease your range. So don't go with the urban myth that these kind of silencers on your weapons increase your range, because they don't. If anything, they cut it. Some of them can cut it quite drastically. It depends on your individual silencer. So silencers, they look good, they can make a bit of difference to your noise, but for the majority of the time they don't. So I would say don't worry about silencing your weapons. You can do, but you don't need to. And things like this, the rubber knives. We've talked lots about rubber knives before. Now, you may think, like in the movies, you're going to walk around in your ghillie, you're going to be practically invisible, sneaking up behind someone, getting the knife kill. It doesn't happen like that. Ghillie suits are actually quite loud, some of them, because of the fabric on them. You hear them rustling around. You're still going to be walking through leaves. You're still going to be having all the kind of environmental noises as you're walking along, trudging through mud, whatever. So don't think you're going to suddenly turn into a ghost and be sneaking up behind someone and taking them down, because it doesn't work like that. But having something like this, if you're lying in a position and you get someone just so happen to walk close enough to you, you can catch them out with it. So they can be a good thing to have, but don't worry about taking one because you don't need them by any means. So, personal defence weapons. Now, we talked about pistols, we talked about PDWs when we did the last video where we were talking about the medic and the supported roles. Now, the time I've used my weapon the most, my sidearm, is when I've been sniping or support gunning, when it's more difficult to move things around, but I've said that before. Now, for the most part I carry a pistol. But sometimes I carry my Mac 11. Now, this is a gas Mac 11, so the silencer actually does make a big difference to the noise, because a lot of the noise you get from this, other than the actual clicking operation, is from the muzzle itself. So this is one of the few weapons where having a silencer does pay, but because of its size, it's nice and lightweight. You can just carry it on a carabiner, ready to lift up and fire. You can carry it in a holster quite easily, especially when you take the silencer off, because it's actually a very, very small, lightweight gun. Very, very good as a sniper sidearm. Plus, nice rate of fire means if you do get overwhelmed, You can put down lots of rounds, put down lots of aggressive fire, and get out of there as fast as possible. But we'll talk about that more in a second. Okay, so we're in our sniper spot and we're waiting to engage the enemy. What happens if we get seen? Now, we don't want to stick around if we do, because we're outgunned and we're outmanned. So the moment we get spotted, we're going to be putting down lots of aggressive fire, falling back as fast as possible. We've been spotted, come on, move! Okay, so we've talked about the role of the sniper. Now let's talk about the role of the marksman. Now, like I said before, the marksman is a unit support, whereas the sniper works independently. So, with the marksman, what you probably want is something semi-automatic over something that's single shot, so you can put down those rounds one after another, but you don't necessarily need to. This is just personal preference again. Like so many things in airsoft, it's personal preference. Now, I love my PSG-1, but it's got very limited range because this is only 300 FPS. And a lot of sites, when you're using single bolt action rifles, will have FPS rules specific for sniping, but not every site, so it's well worth checking out before you go out and buy your weapon. Whereby they will allow beyond their site limit cap, which can be 300 FPS, 350 FPS is a standard. For anyone who has no idea what I'm talking about foot per second. It's the measurement of how fast or how powerful these weapons actually are. Now, like I said, some sites will allow you above the 350 cap, some of them won't. Now, it pays to have weapons that either you can change the spring, because then it means if you buy a weapon which is 500 FPS, but find that you can't use it, you can reduce the spring power to say 300, 350 and make it usable on the site which you're actually playing at. But some weapons like this, especially semi-automatic ones, will come pre-downgraded, so to speak, to fulfill those caps. But a lot of sites won't let you take a semi-automatic weapon if it's over that 350 to 500 FPS site limit. So having a marksman weapon which is below that means you can play at more sites and you're not going to have that issue. If you buy a semi-automatic weapon, an electric weapon or something that's firing at 500 FPS, there aren't a lot of places you can use that kind of thing. But things like these bolt action weapons or the cocking weapons, you don't have anywhere near the problem, even though this one shoots at something like 470 before I put the new spring in. Again, you can use these at places because they have those special sniper rules. They don't apply to the semi-automatic weapons. So let's talk a bit more about, as I say, the marksman. Your role is much like the support gunner in that it's a suppressive role. You can put down accurate fire on a position, keep people's heads down, let your guys move up, or alternatively, when you've got, say you're moving into a position and there's a heavy support gunner firing back at you, or snipers firing back at you, you've got a weapon which has more range and is slightly more accurate, and you can pick off those high value targets. That's the idea of the marksman. But we'll talk more about that in just a second. Okay, today I'm the combat sniper. Now, as you can see, not much on my kit has changed. Still got the same plate carrier, same belt rig, same headgear. Nothing much is different except for my weapon. Now, my weapon is more accurate than their weapons. They can move in, put down those assault rounds, the semi-automatics, full automatic fire, and I'm going to be following them along, putting down accurate fire where it's needed. Okay, so other things you can use for marksman's roles, long-barreled M16s. There are lots of different guns available. As I said, I mentioned the PSG-1. Other good ones for a marksman's role, as opposed to necessarily a sniping role, are things like M14s. M14s are always very good. I see a lot of players playing the marksman role with the M14. Or like I say, there are lots of different M16 variants, M16 sniper variants, which also make very good for that kind of role. And one final note before I end this video is smoke grenades. Now, when you're doing either a marksman role or a sniper role, it makes a lot of sense to carry smoke grenades, because like you saw in the footage before, when you get overwhelmed, you're putting down that aggressive fire. If you've got smoke grenades, you can pull them out, pop a smoke, drop it on the ground, throw it, whatever, and it obscures you while you're moving backwards. But more to it, if you're doing that disruptive tactics, those kind of shoot until you're spotted, then you're running, it could really disrupt the enemy, because all of a sudden they see smoke behind them, they're looking round, and it gives the rest of the forces, it just confuses them. And really, when you're doing this kind of sniping, when you're doing disruptive sniping, it really, that's the point. You want to confuse the enemy, you want to get them so they're at the point where they have no idea where shots are coming from, they don't know where your front line is, and you really just want to mess with them as much as possible. And as I say, having smoke, having grenades, that kind of thing, it helps that out. So, that's it for this video. Next time we're going to be looking at special forces.